Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku betrayed every hero. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The reign over Muzutoful was a miserable, clinging shroud. It wasn't a cleansing storm, full of thunder and dramatic purpose, but a cold, persistent drizzle that seeped into the bones and turned the city's vibrant colors to a uniform, depressing gray. It was the kind of weather that made people pull their collars tight and hurry from one dry place to the next, heads bowed against the gloom. Inside the central Muzutoful Bank, the gloom was of a different sort entirely. It was the hot, suffocating kind, thick with the scent of fear and ozone. Nobody moves! Nobody even breathes wrong! The villain's voice was a gravelly roar that bounced off the marble floors and high ceilings. He was a thick, brutish man, his skin looking like poorly mixed concrete, complete with flecks of gravel. His quirk, it seemed, was as subtle as his methods. Two of his cronies, one a wiry man who could seemingly stretch his limbs like taffy and another who could generate blinding flashes of light, kept the 20-odd hostages huddled in the center of the lobby. Outside, the perimeter was a sea of flashing red and blue lights, their silent strobing painting the wet streets in frantic bursts of color. The police had established a line, keeping the gathering press and morbidly curious onlookers at bay. Among the first heroes on the scene were two of UA's most promising students, sent as part of their advanced work-study program, Tenya Ida and Ochako Uraraka. The situation is stable but tense, Ingenium. A police sergeant reported, his voice tight as he addressed Ida by his hero name. 3 villains, the leader, who calls himself Grit, appears to have a reinforcement-type quirk. The other 2 are support. They're demanding 10 million yen and a helicopter. Standard fare, but they're jumpy. Ida, standing ramrod straight in his armor, chopped a hand through the air. Understood. We must prioritize the safety of the hostages above all else. A reckless charge is out of the question. We must formulate a tactical plan that minimizes risk. Uraraka, her expression a mixture of determination and profound worry, scanned the building's facade. They've covered most of the windows. A direct visual is hard to get. If I could just touch a major support pillar, but getting in close without being seen is the problem. They were good. They were thinking like heroes. They were following the textbook procedures they had spent the last 2 years learning. They were focused on de-escalation, on hostage preservation, on the clean, heroic victory. They were completely unprepared for what was coming. There was no grand announcement. No booming, "I am here!" to reassure the masses. There was only a flicker of movement on a nearby rooftop, a brief silhouette against the slate-gray sky. For a split second, it looked like a jagged fork of green lightning had decided to defy nature and strike upwards from the earth. Then the bank's main atrium window, a massive pane of reinforced security glass, exploded inward. The sound was a deafening crack boom that made everyone, villain and hostage alike, flinch. Shards of glass, rendered harmless and slow-moving by the sheeting rain, cascaded onto the marble floor. Through the newly created opening, a figure landed in a low crouch, rain-slicked and radiating an aura so cold it felt like it was dropping the temperature of the room. Izuku Midoriya, hero named Deku, rose to his full height. The green and black of his costume was darker in the dim light, and the rain gave it a menacing sheen. His cowl was up, but it was his face, the part that was visible, that caused a chill to race down Uraraka's spine as she watched on a tactical monitor. The freckled, perpetually earnest face she knew was gone. In its place was a mask of absolute, unfeeling focus. His eyes, usually so bright and expressive, were narrowed slits of cold, emerald fire. He wasn't smiling. "Who the hell are you?" Grit roared, taking a half-step forward, his skin hardening into a stony gray. "You want to be a hero? You just got these people killed." Deku didn't answer. The silence was more unnerving than any threat. He simply shifted his stance, and the air around him crackled with the contained energy of One for All. The light-flashing villain acted first, cupping his hands to his face. "Flash bang!" he shrieked. A blinding, supernova bright light erupted from his hands, designed to disorient and incapacitate. But before the light even reached its peak, Deku was already moving. Tendrils of pure, black energy erupted from his back, black whip. They weren't the wild, untamed whips of his second year. These were precise, like a surgeon's scalpels. One tendril shot out and wrapped around the villain's entire head, smothering the light and soundlessly slamming his face into the marble floor. A wet crack echoed in the sudden darkness. The stretchy villain, seeing his partner go down, panicked. His arms elongated, shooting across the room like fleshy battering rams. Deku didn't even bother to dodge. He simply vanished. A wisp of gray vapor, smokescreen, was left in his place. The stretchy limbs passed through the harmless smoke and slammed into the far wall. From within the dispersing smoke, Deku reappeared. He was already in the air, propelled by a minute-controlled burst from his legs. He wasn't aiming a grand, city-block-leveling smash. He was a predator closing in for the kill. He landed directly in front of the stretchy villain. The man's eyes went wide with terror. Before he could even retract his limbs, Deku's hand shot out, not in a punch, but with an open palm, striking the villain's sternum. It didn't look like much, but a ripple of kinetic energy, Fa gene, was visible for a fraction of a second under his glove. The sound was not a heroic BM. It was a dull, sickening thud, like a sledgehammer hitting a side of beef. The villain's eyes rolled back in his head as the stored energy cascaded through his torso, instantly breaking his ribs and knocking the air from his lungs in a choked gasp. He collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, completely unconscious. 2 villains down. For seconds, outside, the police and heroes were stunned into silence. What was that? The sergeant whispered, his jaw slack. Ida was rigid, his mind struggling to process the sheer, brutal efficiency he was witnessing. His movements, they are without a shred of hesitation, the level of force. He trailed off, unable to articulate the wrongness of it. In the bank, only Grit was left standing. He stared at his fallen comrades, then back at the silent, green-clad figure. The fear in his eyes was quickly being replaced by cornered animal rage. "You damn monster!" he bellowed, his entire body turning into a thick, grooved layer of concrete. "I'll crush you!" he charged, his footsteps heavy enough to crack the marble tiles. He was a living bulldozer, a tank of a man. Deku stood his ground, unmoving. He waited. He watched. His green eyes tracked every lumbering step, every swing of Grit's stone-like fists. It was like watching a master mathematician solve an equation he'd seen 1,000 times before. Grit swung a fist the size of a cinder block. Deku swayed to the side, the blow passing him by with inches to spare, the wind of its passage not even ruffling his hair. As the villain's momentum carried him forward, Deku's right arm became wreathed in black tendrils. Blackwhip didn't just lash out, it moved with terrifying anatomical precision. The tendrils bypassed the stone fist and wrapped around Grit's exposed elbow and shoulder. Deku planted his feet, and with a sharp, brutal yank, he pulled in the opposite direction of the villain's momentum. The sound was hideous. A wet, grinding pop that echoed louder than any gunshot. Grit screamed, a high-pitched, agonized sound of tearing ligaments and a shoulder being wrenched from its socket. His reinforced arm went limp, hanging at a sickeningly unnatural angle. But Deku wasn't done. Before the villain could even process the pain, more tendrils of Blackwhip shot out, wrapping around his ankles. Deku pulled, and the 2-ton man was swept off his feet, crashing onto his back with a ground-shaking thud that sent spiderweb cracks through the floor. He lay there, dazed and groaning, his one good arm flailing uselessly. Deku walked over to him, his footsteps the only sound in the cavernous room besides the soft weeping of the hostages. He looked down at the defeated villain, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it looked like he might offer a hand, or say something. Instead, he raised his foot, a faint green energy gathering around his iron-soled boot. He brought it down hard on Grit's remaining good wrist. Another sharp, wet crunch echoed through the bank. The villain's scream was cut short as he passed out from the sheer, overwhelming agony. Silence. Deku stood over the 3 unconscious, broken bodies. He took a slow, deep breath, the energy of one for all receding from his body. Then he turned to the hostages. They stared at him, their faces a mixture of relief and raw terror. They had been saved, yes, but they had also just witnessed a display of violence so controlled, and so ruthless it bordered on monstrous. This wasn't the kind of rescue they saw on TV. There was no reassuring smile, no booming catchphrase. Deku's eyes swept over them, a quick, clinical assessment. No visible injuries. Minimal signs of shock. Threat neutralized. His job was done. Without a single word of comfort, not even a nod, he turned and walked back toward the shattered window. Wait! A young woman stammered, her voice trembling. Thank you. Deku paused at the ledge, his back to her. He didn't turn around. Stay here. The paramedics will be inside in a moment. His voice was flat, devoid of warmth, like a pre-recorded message. And with that, he was gone, a green flash into the rain, leaving a broken room and a profound sense of unease in his wake. The common room of the Heights Alliance dormitory was usually a cacophony of life. Kaminari and Siro would be locked in a video game battle. Mina would be trying to teach someone a new dance move, and the smell of whatever Sato was stress baking would fill the air. Tonight, it was quiet. The only sound was the incessant drumming of the rain against the windows and the low murmur of a news report on the large television. The villains were apprehended with what experts are calling unprecedented efficiency by the hero in training, Deku. A news anchor said, her voice professionally upbeat. While medical reports indicate the perpetrators sustained serious injuries, including multiple fractures and dislocations, all hostages were rescued without a single scratch. It's another powerful display from the young man many are calling the next symbol of peace. Unprecedented efficiency. Denki Kaminari repeated, his voice hollow. He was slumped on the couch, his usual electric energy completely absent. Is that what we're calling it? He broke that guy's arm after he was already down. Mina Ashido hugged a pillow to her chest, her bright pink skin looking pale. Ida-kun, Uraraka-chan, you were there. On the monitor, it was scary. Ida, who had been pacing a tight, frantic line across the rug, stopped. He pushed his glasses up his nose, a gesture that was usually meant to convey authority, but now just seemed shaky. It was a flagrant disregard for standard hero protocols. The level of force was excessive and punitive. A hero's duty is to subdue, not to maim. He incapacitated them in a manner that ensures long-term, debilitating injuries, but he saved everyone. Hanta Siro pointed out quietly from his armchair. Fast. No one got hurt. Isn't that the goal? There's a way to do things, man. Eijiro Kurishima countered, his usual cheerful grin gone. He looked genuinely troubled, his brow furrowed. It's about inspiring hope, not fear. What he did today, that wasn't manly. It was just brutal. All eyes turned to Ochako Uraraka. She was curled up in a large armchair, staring into a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. She had been the quietest of all since they'd returned. Ochako? Tsuyu Ajiri asked, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Uraraka looked up, and her friends saw the glistening tracks of tears on her cheeks. When he looked at the hostages, she whispered, her voice cracking. It was like he wasn't looking at people, he was looking at objectives. Things to be secured. And when he left, there was nothing. No smile. No kindness. Just emptiness. That wasn't the Deku-kun I know. The Deku she knew was the boy who would mumble endlessly about strategies to save people while minimizing harm. The boy whose notebooks were filled with frantic, adoring analyses of heroes and their strengths. The boy who cried from relief after a successful rescue. That boy seemed to be gone, replaced by a cold, efficient stranger wearing his face. The dormitory's main door slid open. The conversation died instantly. Izuku Midoriya walked in, dripping water onto the entryway mat. He methodically toed off his boots, his movements economical and precise. He looked up and saw the entire class staring at him. His expression didn't change. It remained a placid, unreadable mask. Midoriya, Ida began, stepping forward. We need to discuss your conduct during the altercation at the bank. I'm tired, Ida. Deku cut him off, his voice low and even. He walked past the group, heading for the kitchen. Report's been filed. The HPSC reviewed my bodycam footage. It was cleared. Shoto Todoroki, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. His heterochromatic eyes were narrowed, analytical. It was tactically flawless, he stated, his voice a calm counterpoint to the emotional turmoil in the room. You used smokescreen to create sensory deprivation, Black Whip for precise, non-lethal takedowns of the ranged threats, and FA Gene for a single, concussive blow to neutralize the close-quarters combatant. Your final actions against the leader were designed to instantly end his capacity to fight by targeting his limbs. It wasn't random brutality. Every move was calculated. Todoroki's cold analysis made it even worse. This wasn't a momentary loss of control. It was a conscious choice. Deku paused at the kitchen counter, pouring himself a glass of water. He didn't turn to face them. Glad someone was paying attention. The sheer coldness of the remark hung in the air, thick and suffocating. This was the change they'd all been noticing for weeks, ever since his return to UA after the war. The frantic mumbling had stopped, replaced by long, unnerving silences. He spent all his free time either in the gym, pushing his body to inhuman limits, or with his notebooks. But the notebooks had changed, too. Uraraka had accidentally glimpsed one open on his desk a few days ago. The familiar, slightly messy sketches of heroes were gone. In their place were stark, neat schematics, cross-sections of buildings with structural weak points highlighted in red, anatomical diagrams of the human body, with notes on nerve clusters, joint vulnerabilities, and optimal angles for incapacitating strikes. The handwriting was no longer a frantic scrawl, it was a cold, precise script. It was a book on how to break things, buildings, bodies, spirits, with maximum efficiency. Deku, the voice was a low growl, like stones grinding together. Everyone turned. Katsuki Bakugo had been leaning against the far wall, arms crossed, his face a thunderous mask. He had been silent the entire time, just watching, his crimson eyes fixed on Deku's back. Now, he pushed himself off the wall and began to walk forward. That wasn't a fight, Bakugo said, his voice dangerously low. That was a goddamn execution. Deku finally turned, taking a slow sip of his water. He looked at Bakugo, his expression unchanging. They're alive. The hostages are safe. The mission was a success. What's the problem, Kakin? The use of the childhood nickname, spoken in that dead, flat tone, made Bakugo's hands start to smoke. Tiny pops and crackles of nitroglycerin echoed in the tense quiet. The problem? Bakugo snarled, stalking closer until he was just a few feet from Deku. Is that you didn't even give them a chance? Heroes fight. They challenge. They inspire. You went in there like a damn Terminator and took them apart piece by piece. There's no light in your eyes, you bastard. You're not fighting like a hero. It was the ultimate insult from Bakugo. For all his rage and bluster, his core belief in the dazzling, overwhelming victory of a true hero, of all might, was absolute. He was seeing the complete antithesis of that ideal in the one person he had, in his own twisted way, come to respect as a rival for that dream. Deku's face, for the first time, shifted. A flicker of something dark and anciently tired passed through his eyes. He set his glass down on the counter with a soft click. You're wrong, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than all of Bakugo's shouting. I'm fighting to win. That's all that matters. That's not, isn't it? Deku interrupted, his voice gaining a sharp, cutting edge. How many people died in the war, Kakin? How many civilians were crushed, incinerated, or just plain forgotten while heroes were busy striking poses and trying to have their heroic moments? Sir Knight, I saw the future and died anyway. The entire system collapsed in a day because it was more focused on public image than on results. Hope and smiles didn't stop Shigaraki's decay. They didn't save the thousands of people who are dead right now. He took a step closer to Bakugo, invading his space, forcing his rival to look him in the eye. The faint, ethereal glow of one for all began to emanate from Deku, a silent warning. I'm not interested in inspiring people anymore, Deku said, his voice a low, chilling promise. I'm not interested in being a symbol. I am interested in ending threats. Permanently and efficiently, so no one else has to die. If that means breaking a few bones, I'll do it. If it means being a monster in the eyes of men who want pretty fights, then so be it. I will save everyone. No matter what it takes. Bakugo was speechless. He stared into Deku's eyes and saw not the nerdy, crying kid he'd bullied, nor the determined rival who had stood against him. He saw a stranger, An ideologue forged in the fires of a tragedy that had broken something deep inside him. Without another word, Deku turned and walked out of the common room, his footsteps echoing in the silence he left behind. Bakugo stood there, his hands still crackling with useless, frustrated energy, the words unspoken lodged in his throat. This isn't saving them, you idiot. This is just breaking everything. Later, in the sterile privacy of his room, the mask finally fell. The All Might posters were gone. The shelves once groaning under the weight of hero merchandise were now bare, save for a few tactical manuals and textbooks on engineering. The room was no longer a shrine to a dream. It was the Spartan barracks of a soldier. Izuku Midoriya sat on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. His body trembled, not from cold, but from a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The cold resolve he projected was a shield, a carefully constructed fortress, and behind its walls, he was crumbling. He closed his eyes, and the images came unbidden. Not of the bank, but of the war. The dust, so thick it felt like swallowing sandpaper. The constant screaming, a symphony of grief and terror that had become the soundtrack to his life. A little girl with a present mic doll, staring blankly at a building that had collapsed on her home, her parents inside. A fellow hero, someone whose name he never even learned, vaporized before his eyes by one of Dabi's attacks. The weight of All Might's withered form, the guilt of physical stone in his gut, the feeling of being hunted, of running, of knowing that for all his incredible power, he was still failing. He remembered the moment his new philosophy had crystallized. He'd been watching a news report from a refugee camp. The reporter was interviewing a man who had lost his entire family. The man wasn't crying. He was just numb. He looked into the camera and said, "The heroes, they tried. They're always trying. But what's the point in trying if you always fail?" That was it. The breaking point. The system wasn't just flawed, it was a lie. A beautiful, comforting lie that told people a smiling hero would always be there to save the day, when the reality was chaos, death, and failure. The hero system, with its rankings, its media circuses, and its reactive nature, was designed to create symbols, not solutions. It was a dam made of paper, holding back an ocean of inevitable sorrow. To save everyone. His oath. His reason for being. It was an impossible, childish dream in this world. Unless he changed the world itself. He couldn't save people within the system. So he had to tear the system down. He had to burn away the corruption, the celebrity worship, the half-measures. He had to build something new from the ashes. A world where threats were eliminated before they could fester. A world ruled by logic and security, not hope and chance. A world where no other little boy would have to watch his dreams turn to dust. And he was the only one who could do it. He had the power. He had the intellect. And now, he had the will. The pain was the price. The looks of fear and betrayal from his friends were daggers in his heart. Uraraka's tears, Ida's condemnation, Bakugo's rage, they were his penance. The torment he felt was proof that he was still human, but he couldn't let that humanity stop him. He had to be the necessary evil. The surgeon who cuts away the disease to save the patient. His hands, scarred and powerful, clenched into fists. He had to be stronger. Colder. A soft chime emanated from a small, nondescript black laptop on his desk. It was a custom-built, heavily encrypted machine, untraceable and secure. He opened it. A single, secure chat window was open. The text was encrypted, but it decrypted in real time on his screen. A new message appeared. The user ID was simply a chess king icon. King, the news is praising your name. They call you efficient. They call you the future. They are already beginning to accept the new reality, even if they don't know it yet. Izuku's fingers hovered over the keyboard. His reflection stared back at him from the dark screen. He saw the cold, hard lines of his face, the deadness in his eyes. He looked like a villain. Maybe he was. Deku, they're afraid. My friends, they're afraid of me. The reply was almost instantaneous. A distorted, synthesized voice, smooth and persuasive, emanated from the speakers. It was the voice that had found him in his darkest moment, the voice that had offered not brainwashing, but a terrible, compelling logic. Fear is a tool, ninth. one that heroes have foolishly discarded in favor of love. But love is fickle. Fear, however, fear commands respect. It ensures order. They are afraid because you represent a change they cannot comprehend. You represent the end of their comfortable lives. Izuku closed his eyes, the voice washing over him, reinforcing the walls of his fortress. It was all for one. Not as a monster, but as a mentor. The devil on his shoulder, whispering the truths the angels were too afraid to admit. You have proven you have the will to act. The voice continued, its tone shifting from philosophical to practical. Now the real work begins. We cannot simply cut off the limbs of this corrupt system, we must strike at its heart. The Hero Public Safety Commission and their network of agencies are planning a coordinated raid on a high-value P-Left cell in the Fukuya district. They believe their intelligence is secure. A new window popped up on the screen, displaying tactical maps, hero rosters, and patrol routes. Deku's eyes scanned the data, his analytical mind instantly processing the information. He could see the flaws in their plan, the openings, the potential for disaster. The synthesized voice spoke again, its tone dropping to a conspiratorial hush. It will be your first true test. The first stone you must cast to shatter their world of glass. The first target is ready. Are you prepared to sever your first tie, Ninth? To sever his first tie. The words meant more than just sabotaging a mission. It meant betraying the heroes who would be fighting alongside him. Endeavor. Hawks. The heroes he once looked up to. It was the point of no return. Izuku Midoriya looked at his reflection in the screen. At the tired, haunted boy playing the part of a monster, he thought of the man in the refugee camp, of all the lives lost, of the fundamental lie he was sworn to uphold. The path ahead was one of darkness, betrayal, and profound loneliness. But he believed, with every fiber of his being, that it was the only path to a world that was truly saved. He typed his reply, his fingers steady. Deku. I am. The air in the Hero Public Safety Commission's tactical briefing room was stale and cold, recycled to a point of near total sterility. It smelled of nothing, which was somehow more unsettling than the scent of sweat and anticipation that usually preceded a major operation. The only color in the room came from the massive, holographic map floating in its center, a three-dimensional blueprint of a sprawling warehouse district on the industrial coast of Fukuya. Lines of attack, hero placements, and extraction routes were painted onto the display in crisp, glowing vectors of red and blue. It was a picture of perfect, clinical control. Izuku Midoriya stood in the back of the room, a silent green and black pillar against the gray walls. He watched the light from the hologram play across the faces of the heroes assembled, his own expression carefully neutral. These were the best of the best. At the head of the assembly stood Endeavor, the current #1 hero, his arms crossed over his massive chest, his trademark flames burning at a low, impatient simmer. He radiated an aura of barely contained power, his fierce turquoise eyes scanning the faces of his team as if daring any of them to show a flicker of weakness. Beside him, looking deceptively casual with his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, was Hawks. The #2 hero's crimson wings were relaxed, but his golden eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He was the architect of this operation, the master of intelligence who had pinpointed this high-value target, a clandestine factory manufacturing quirk-enhancing trigger drugs, run by a dedicated cell of Paranormal Liberation Front loyalists who had gone to ground after the war. The objective is simple. Endeavor's voice boomed, cutting through the silence. Hawk's intelligence has given us a 20-minute window during their shift change. Team Alpha, led by me, will take the main loading bay. We are the hammer. Team Beta, led by Ryukyu, will secure the eastern and western perimeters to cut off escape. Team Gamma. He gestured to a smaller group of heroes specializing in search and rescue, including Fat Gum, will be on standby for containment and civilian protection, though intel suggests the area is deserted tonight. He then turned his fiery gaze to the back of the room, settling on 3 figures from UA. Ingenium Uravity, you are with Team Gamma. Your priority is evacuation and support. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Understood? Sir, yes, sir. Ida barked, saluting crisply. Uraraka gave a more subdued but equally determined, yes, sir. Endeavor's eyes moved to the 3rd student. Deku. You're with me. Team Alpha. You are our battering ram. When I give the signal, you will breach the primary storage facility's northern wall. The ensuing chaos will be our entry point. Can you handle that? Izuku met the number one hero's gaze without flinching. Inside his mind, a cold, detached part of him was already dissecting the plan. A battering ram. So simple. So artless. They still see my power as a blunt instrument. Good. He saw the branching paths of possibility, the precise points where a single action could cascade into systemic failure. The plan was solid, but like any chain, it was only as strong as its weakest link. Or its most treacherous one. I can't, Izuku said, his voice flat and even. Hawks tilted his head, a faint, curious smile on his lips. Confidence. I like it. Our intel on this is airtight, by the way. My feathers have been watching this place for weeks. They don't know we're coming. It'll be a clean sweep. Izuku gave a curt nod, the image of Hawk's intel file, the one All for One had sent him last night, flashing in his mind. He knew their patrol routes, their guard rotations, the specific quirks of the lieutenants in charge. He also knew the countermeasures the villains had already put in place, countermeasures Hawk's feathers, flying high above, could never have spotted. The dam of Heroes Society was riddled with cracks, but the biggest one was arrogance. They believed they were still in control. As the briefing concluded and the heroes began to move out, Izuku felt a familiar presence approach. He didn't need to turn to know it was Uraraka. He could feel her worried energy, the gentle warmth that had once been a source of comfort but now felt like a brand on his skin. Deku-kun? She began, her voice soft and hesitant. He kept his gaze fixed on the dissipating hologram. Uravity. You should be with your team. The use of her hero name was a deliberate wall, and he saw her flinch from the corner of his eye. I know, she said, pressing on anyway. After the bank, everyone's worried about you. I'm worried about you. Are you okay? Her voice was so full of genuine concern, so pure, that for a fraction of a second, the fortress around his heart cracked. A wave of agonizing guilt washed over him. He wanted to turn to her, to see her kind face, to tell her everything, to beg for her forgiveness. He wanted to be the old Deku again, the boy who could share his burdens and draw strength from his friends. But that boy was a casualty of the war. He was a ghost, and his dreams were ashes. He clenched his fists, the leather of his gloves creaking. He forced the wave of emotion down, burying it under layers of cold, hard resolve. He couldn't afford that weakness. Not now. Not when he was so close. He finally turned to face her, his expression an unreadable mask. He looked at her, really looked at her, at the determined set of her jaw, the worry in her wide brown eyes, the fundamental goodness that radiated from her like warmth from a hearth. She was everything he was fighting to protect. And everything he was about to betray. Ochako, he said, his voice a low, raw whisper that was more intimate and more painful than his previous coldness. The sound of her given name made her eyes widen. To build a world where people like you don't have to get hurt, where you don't have to stand on a battlefield, sacrifices have to be made. He took a half-step closer, his gaze intense, burning with a fanatic's conviction. I hope one day you'll understand. Before she could process the strange, terrifying finality in his words, he turned and walked away, his back straight, his shoulders squared. He strode toward Team Alpha, toward Endeavor, leaving Uraraka standing alone in the sterile room. She watched him go, a cold dread pooling in her stomach. It felt like she was watching him walk off the edge of a cliff. The words weren't a reassurance, they were a goodbye. The Fukuya industrial port was a skeletal maze of dormant cranes and rust-streaked warehouses under the moonless, overcast sky. The air was heavy with the smell of brine, diesel, and the approaching rain. Team Alpha crouched in the shadow of a mountain of shipping containers, the target warehouse 100 yards away, a colossal block of corrugated metal and reinforced concrete. Positions! Endeavor grunted into his comm unit, his voice a low crackle in their ears. Beta team report, west flank secure. Came Ryukyu's voice, calm and steady. East flank secure. Another hero confirmed. All clear, Endeavor stated. He looked over at Izuku. Deku. On my mark. Give us a door. Izuku nodded, rolling his shoulders. He focused, letting the familiar power of one for all thrum through his veins. Green lightning began to dance across his limbs. He could feel the eyes of the other heroes on him, a mixture of awe and apprehension. They saw the power, but they couldn't see the purpose behind it. Focus, he told himself, his internal monologue a cold, sharp counterpoint to the building energy. The north wall, as planned. But not the center. Target the primary support junction, 10 meters to the left. The structural analysis AFO provided was clear. A controlled blast there won't just make a hole. It will compromise the integrity of the entire roof structure over the eastern wing, the wing where the villains had concentrated their heaviest firepower. Mark! Endeavor roared. Izuku exploded into motion. He was a green blur, crossing the distance in a heartbeat. He drew his leg back, the energy of one for all coalescing into a blinding point of light at the tip of his boot. Delaware! Smash! His voice ripped through the night air as his foot connected with the wall. The impact was titanic. But instead of a clean, contained explosion, the result was far more chaotic. The metal siding ripped and tore, but the concussive force, precisely applied to the hidden support beam, sent a shuddering groan through the entire structure. A massive section of the wall buckled and blew inward, just as planned. Alpha Team, go! Endeavor bellowed, charging through the newly created breach with a roar, his body wreathed in flame. The moment they were inside, it was clear something was terribly wrong. This wasn't a surprise attack. It was a kill box. The villains weren't in the center of the warehouse as Intel had suggested. They were entrenched. Makeshift barricades were erected, and from behind them, a dozen villains opened fire. But it wasn't just gunfire. A villain with a quirk that let him spit corrosive acid targeted the heroes who relied on metal armor. Another generated intense sonic frequencies that immediately began to disrupt their comms, turning Endeavor's commands into bursts of painful static. Ambush! A hero yelled, diving for cover as a volley of acid ate through a steel girder where he'd been standing a second before. Hawks, monitoring from a high perch, felt a jolt of ice in his veins. They knew. They knew our entry point. They knew our team composition. My intel, it was compromised. In the heart of the chaos, Izuku moved like a phantom. They're trying to jam our comms, he shouted, his voice cutting through the din. I'll create a diversion. He activated smokescreen. But this wasn't just a small puff to cover a retreat. He released a massive, dense cloud of thick gray smoke that billowed out in seconds, engulfing the entire central chamber. It was a tactically sound move on the surface. Deny the enemy visual contact. But he knew exactly what the real effect would be. The heroes, already struggling with scrambled communications, were now blind. I can't see! One of the pros from Team Alpha yelled. Where are the targets? Hold your positions! Endeavor roared, his flames creating a bubble of visibility around him, but also making him the most obvious target. Under the cover of his own smoke, Izuku was a predator. His vision was slightly obscured, but he didn't need to see. He had memorized the layout. He knew where every villain was, and he knew where every hero would be. He saw one of his teammates, the pro-hero Burnin, preparing to unleash a torrent of flame toward a barricade. A sound-based villain was positioned just behind it, her primary weakness being intense heat. It would have been a perfect takedown. Can't let that happen, Izuku thought, his heart a cold, heavy stone. Burnin, look out! He yelled, and before she could react, a tendril of black whip shot out from the smoke, wrapped around her ankle, and yanked her backward. Hey! What gives, kid? She sputtered, stumbling and losing her footing. There was a sniper! Izuku lied, his voice strained with false urgency as he pointed to a random spot on the catwalks above. He had saved her, but in doing so, he had taken a key piece off the board and allowed the sound villain to continue wreaking havoc on their coordination. The shuddering groan from the initial breach suddenly intensified. The roof above the eastern wing, its support compromised by his Delaware smash, was beginning to give way. Chunks of concrete and twisted metal began to rain down. The roof is coming down! Someone screamed over the static. This was his main gambit. I'll stabilize it! Izuku shouted, his voice a beacon of false heroism in the chaos. He launched himself into the air using float, a dozen black whip tendrils shooting out from his back. They snaked through the smoke-filled air, wrapping around failing beams and groaning trusses. To the blind and disoriented heroes below, it looked like a desperate, heroic attempt to hold the collapsing structure together. But his true targets were different. Two tendrils, faster than the eye could follow, shot past the beams and wrapped around the legs of two different heroes from Team Alpha who were just beginning to effectively push back the villains. With a powerful, calculated tug disguised as part of his larger stabilization effort, he pulled them off balance, sending them careening into a pile of crates. "Man down!" one of them yelled, clutching a twisted ankle. Now the final piece. The collapse itself. He held the roof for a theatrical 10 seconds, grunting with effort, the green lightning of One for All flaring dramatically around him. "I can't hold it!" he roared. "Everyone, get back! Get back now!" He released his hold. The entire eastern wing of the warehouse came crashing down in a titanic waterfall of steel and concrete. The sound was a deafening, grinding cataclysm that shook the very ground. The collapse didn't just fall vertically. It cascaded, creating an impenetrable wall of debris that perfectly separated Team Alpha from the main villain force, including the high-value leader who was overseeing the trigger production. The remaining villains, their escape route now completely secured by the very heroes sent to stop them, didn't hesitate. They vanished into the labyrinthine tunnels of the port, their mission a success. The smoke began to clear. Silence descended, broken only by the groans of the injured and the hiss of rain on hot metal. Team Alpha stood in the ruins, cut off, defeated. Several of their members were injured, sprains, concussions, a dislocated shoulder. Nothing life-threatening, but they were out of the fight. The enemy was gone. The mission was an absolute, unmitigated failure. Izuku landed softly amidst the wreckage, breathing heavily, selling the exhaustion. He looked at the devastation he had wrought, the faces of the heroes he had betrayed staring at the wall of debris. He had done it. He had taken their perfect, airtight plan and turned it into a disaster, and no one suspected a thing. The makeshift command post was a scene of controlled chaos. Paramedics rushed between ambulances, their red and white uniforms stark against the dreary backdrop of the port. The rain was falling harder now, washing away the dust but not the bitter sting of defeat. Endeavor stood apart from the others, his flames extinguished, steam rising from his hero's suit. His face was a mask of cold fury, the muscle in his jaw twitching. This was more than a failed mission, it was a public humiliation. Hawks landed silently beside him, retracting his wings. Most of his primary feathers were gone, burned away or torn. He looked tired, and for the first time since Endeavor had known him, the easygoing smirk was completely absent. "Total failure," Endeavor growled, not looking at him. "They were waiting for us. They knew everything. Your intel was shit, Hawks. My intel was perfect," Hawks replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "That's the problem. They didn't just anticipate a raid. They anticipated our raid. They had an acid quirk user ready for the heroes with metal gear. They had a sonic jammer positioned away from the main entry point. They had countermeasures for my feathers. This wasn't a leak. This was a direct line feed of our entire battle plan." Endeavor finally turned to face him. "What are you saying? One of us? Think about it." Hawks pressed, his golden eyes intense. "Comms go down the moment we're inside. A massive, disorienting smokescreen is deployed, blinding our own forces more than theirs. Key offensive heroes are taken out of the fight by accidents. And then, the final stroke, a structural collapse so perfectly timed and placed that it not only covers the enemy's retreat but also physically separates us from them. It was a symphony of chaos, Endeavor, and one person was holding the baton. The implication hung in the damp air between them. Endeavor's eyes narrowed. He thought back to the chaos, to the blinding smoke, to the collapsing roof. He remembered the green-clad figure at the center of it all. "Midoriya?" Endeavor's voice was a low rumble of disbelief. "You're accusing All Might's successor? The boy is reckless. His control is still unrefined. He caused the collapse, yes, but he was trying to help. I saw him. Did you?" Hawks shot back, taking a step closer. "Or did you see what you were meant to see? A young hero fighting desperately. I saw something else. I saw a Delaware smash that didn't just breach a wall. It targeted a load-bearing T-junction a civil engineer would have to study blueprints to find. I saw a smoke screen that gave the enemy perfect cover to reposition. I saw black whip tendrils that saved people by pulling them out of tactically advantageous positions. Every single one of his mistakes was a tactical masterstroke for the enemy. It was too precise. Too perfect to be an accident. Endeavor stared at Hawks, the gears turning in his mind. He was a man of fire and force, not espionage. He saw the world in terms of power and confrontation. The idea of such deep, subtle betrayal from a hero, from that hero, was almost unthinkable. But Hawks was the best intelligence agent in the country. His instincts were legendary. "You have no proof," Endeavor stated, his voice flat. "No," Hawks admitted, frustration clear in his tone. "I have nothing but a pattern. And a very, very bad feeling. He's playing a different game, Endeavor. And we're not even on the board. I'm not asking you to arrest him. I'm asking you to watch him. Watch every move, every word. Because the leaking dam just broke, and I think I know who opened the floodgates." Endeavor said nothing. He turned his gaze toward the far side of the perimeter, where the UA students were being checked over by paramedics. Ida was arguing with a medic, insisting he was fine. Uraraka was staring off into the distance, her face pale and troubled. And then he saw him. Deku. He was sitting on the bumper of an ambulance, a blanket draped over his shoulders. A paramedic was talking to him, but he didn't seem to be listening. He was just staring at his hands. To anyone else, he looked like a young hero in shock, overwhelmed by the night's failure. But now, filtered through Hawk's suspicion, Endeavor saw something else. He saw the stillness. The utter lack of surprise. The cold, calculating calm of a man who had just executed his plan perfectly. A chill, entirely unrelated to the rain, crept down the number one hero's spine. Izuku didn't go back to the dorms right away. He couldn't. The thought of facing his classmates, of seeing their disappointment, and having to feign his own, was a weight he didn't have the strength to bear. Not yet. He found himself on the roof of one of UA's academic buildings, a place he used to frequent with all might. The rain had softened to a fine mist, and the sprawling lights of the city spread out before him like a galaxy of fallen stars. It was a beautiful, peaceful view that brought him no peace at all. He replayed the night's events in his mind, not with pride, but with the cold, detached analysis of a general reviewing a battle. Objective: sabotage raid, facilitate PLF escape. Result: success. Hero casualties: minimal, non-critical. Enemy casualties: 0. Primary target secured and extracted by PLF. Public trust in top heroes: damaged. Suspicion: raised in Hawks, possibly Endeavor. Collateral damage: Uraraka's emotional state. Acceptable losses. That last thought made him sick. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes, trying to block out the image of her face after he had spoken to her. The confusion, the hurt. It was a necessary cut, he told himself. A surgeon doesn't apologize to the flesh he slices. He had to sever these ties. He had to burn these bridges. If he let their pain stop him, then all the suffering, all the death that had led him to this path, would be for nothing. He was so tired. He sank to his knees on the wet rooftop, the cold seeping through his costume. The ghost of his younger self was screaming at him, a frantic, crying child who couldn't understand how they had become this. The boy who dreamed of saving people with a smile was now betraying his friends and allies, consorting with the world's greatest evil, and calling it salvation. He pulled out the small, black laptop. It felt heavier than it should. He opened it, the screen casting a pale, sickly light on his face. The secure chat window was already open. A message from King was waiting. King, a flawless performance. An artist of chaos, indeed. You turn their greatest strength, their unity, into their fatal weakness. Endeavor is humiliated. Hawks is suspicious but powerless. The first major pillar of their society has been shaken. Well done, my boy, my boy. The words were a twisted echo of All Might. They felt like acid corroding the last vestiges of his old self. He stared at the message, the praise feeling hollow and obscene. This wasn't a victory, it was a desecration. He didn't reply. He couldn't. What was there to say? He simply closed the laptop, plunging his face back into darkness. The silence of the rooftop rushed in to meet him, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the ghosts of the heroes he had betrayed, the phantom echo of Uraraka's worried voice, and the chilling, persuasive whisper of all for one, a poison that now lived in his own heart. The dam had broken. And the flood was just beginning. The sun, for the first time in what felt like weeks, had conquered the gray gloom of Mizurifu. It shone with a brilliant, almost defiant optimism, glinting off the chrome and glass of the newly constructed Hero Hope Plaza. The plaza was the Hero Public Safety Commission's grand answer to the despair that had lingered since the Paranormal Liberation War, a sprawling public space dedicated to the enduring spirit of heroism. Bronze statues of the top 10 heroes, in their most iconic poses, lined a grand promenade leading to a central fountain. Banners in vibrant blues and golds, bearing slogans like a new dawn, and stronger than ever, fluttered in the gentle breeze. It was a masterpiece of public relations, a carefully orchestrated spectacle designed to plaster over the cracks in society's faith. And the public was buying it. Thousands of people packed the plaza, their faces upturned, a sea of smiles and camera phones. They cheered as heroes walked among them, shaking hands, signing autographs, and posing for pictures. It was a picture of peace, so perfect it felt fragile, like a beautiful scene painted on a pane of glass. From a seat on the main stage, Toshinori Yagi watched the proceedings with a complex mixture of pride and melancholy. Dressed in a loose-fitting, but still respectable, yellow suit, he was a ghost at this feast. The crowd still cheered when the Jumbotron showed his gaunt face, the remnants of love for all might still burning bright, but he felt a profound disconnect. This new era was being built by others, by Endeavor, by Hawks, by the very students he had taught. He was a symbol of the past, a relic to be honored but ultimately shelved. His gaze drifted to the edge of the stage where several members of Class 1A stood in their hero costumes, serving as a blend of honor guard and secondary security. Ida was, of course, directing foot traffic with rigid, enthusiastic gestures. Uraraka was helping a lost child find her parents, her smile warm and genuine, though Toshinori could see the faint, lingering worry in her eyes whenever she thought no one was looking. He knew the source of that worry. They all shared it. Izuka Midoriya was not with them. At the HPSC's specific request, and with Endeavor's grudging approval, he was positioned on the roof of an adjacent skyscraper, acting as high ground overwatch. The official reason was that his unique mobility made him the ideal rapid response asset. The unofficial reason, Toshinori suspected, was that no one quite knew what to do with him anymore. After the disaster at the Fukuya port, a quiet but palpable tension followed the boy wherever he went. Hawks had been tight-lipped, but his sharp gaze now lingered on Midoriya whenever they were in the same room. Toshinori sighed, the sound lost in the roar of the crowd as Endeavor took the stage. The number one hero's presence was immense, his flames burning like a miniature sun. He spoke of resilience, of strength, of the unwavering commitment of heroes to protect society. It was a good speech, full of fire and power. It was exactly what the people wanted to hear, but to Toshinori it felt hollow. He remembered his own speeches, the smiles he'd forced even when his body was screaming in agony. He remembered the lie he had lived. Peace built on lies is no peace at all, a voice whispered in his mind. It was Deku's voice, cold and sharp, from that night in the dorms. The memory sent a shiver through him. He scanned the rooftops, his experienced eyes finally finding the small, green and black figure. A lone sentinel against the bright blue sky. Toshinori's heart ached. What is going on in your head, my boy? The first sign that something was wrong was subtle. A flicker. The massive Jumbotron screen behind Endeavor, which had been showing a montage of heroic rescues, suddenly glitched, displaying a burst of static for a split second. Most people didn't even notice. Hawks, however, went rigid, his head snapping up. Then it happened again, this time accompanied by a sharp squeal of feedback from the plaza's speaker system. The cheerful music died, replaced by a low, ominous hum. Technical difficulties, it seems, Endeavor grumbled, annoyed at the interruption. He tapped his comm unit. Control room, what's going on? Only static answered him. Panic, like a cold ripple, began to spread through the heroes on the ground. Mirko, the rabid hero, tensed, her powerful legs coiling. My comms are dead, she said, her voice a low growl. Mine too, Edgeshot confirmed, his masked face turning towards the rooftops. And then, the sky darkened. It wasn't a cloud. It was a swirling vortex of black and purple energy, a sight chillingly familiar to anyone who had witnessed the Camino incident. From the vortex, figures began to drop into the center of the plaza, landing with enough force to crack the pristine polished stone. The crowd's cheerful roar transformed into a collective scream of terror. Tamura Shigaraki landed first, a wicked grin spreading across his scarred face. His tattered black coat billowed around him as he surveyed the panicking masses. Well, well, he rasped, his voice amplified by some unseen force. Look at all the happy little ants. Time to watch you all scatter. More figures appeared. Dobby, his patchwork skin a horrifying sight in the bright sunlight, his blue flames already licking at his hands. Himiko Toga, dancing on the balls of her feet, a delirious, bloodthirsty smile on her face as she brandished her knives. Spinner, Mr. Compress, and behind them, 3 hulking monstrosities, Hai and Nomu, their exposed brains and vacant eyes a testament to their unnatural creation. The attack had begun. Protect the civilians! Form a perimeter! Endeavor roared, his body exploding in a furious inferno. He was rage and fire incarnate, but even he knew this was a catastrophe. The villains had struck at the heart of their PR campaign, in front of the entire world. The heroes charged, but the villains were prepared. It was immediately, terrifyingly obvious that they were not just attacking, they were hunting. Edgeshot, the ninja hero, moved first, a blur of motion attempting to strike at Mr. Compress. But as he shot across the plaza, Spinner slammed the base of his massive blade staff onto the ground. The weapon shattered, releasing a thick, viscous goo that spread across the stone in a wide circle. Edgeshot's foot hit the substance and his lightning-fast movements came to a dead stop. He was stuck fast, his momentum utterly neutralized. What is this stuff? He grunted, struggling against the adhesive. A little something from the doc's lab, Spinner cackled. Specially designed for speedsters. Can't run if you can't move your feet. Mirko, seeing her comrade trapped, bounded forward, her powerful legs launching her into the air. She aimed a devastating axe kick at one of the Nomu. Luna Tijeras! She screamed. The Nomu, a hulking beast with thick, rubbery skin, didn't even try to block. It simply took the hit. There was a sickening squelch, but instead of shattering its skull, Mirko's leg was absorbed into its gelatinous flesh. The creature's body rippled, dispersing the kinetic energy of her blow completely. It was a perfect shock absorber. Before she could react, muscular pseudopods erupted from its body, wrapping around her, squeezing the air from her lungs. It wasn't trying to crush her, it was simply holding her, neutralizing her overwhelming power through sheer, brute endurance. Hawks was already in the air, his crimson feathers raining down like daggers on the villains below. He was aiming for Toga and Spinner, trying to create an opening for the other heroes. Looking for me, pretty bird? A voice drawled from behind him. Hawks twisted in midair, his eyes widening in shock. Dalby was standing on the edge of a rooftop, his arm outstretched. A jet of brilliant blue flame, hotter and more intense than anything Endeavor could produce, shot across the sky. It wasn't aimed at Hawk's body, it was aimed at his wings. Hawks cried out as the superheated fire engulfed his feathers. The delicate appendages, his primary weapon and the source of his mobility, burned away in an instant, turning to black ash. His flight became an uncontrolled tumble, and he crashed onto a lower balcony, smoke pluming from his back. Hard to fly when you're plucked, Dalby mocked, a cruel smirk on his face, before leaping down to join the fray below. It was a systematic dismantling. Every hero was being countered with chilling precision. They weren't just fighting villains, they were fighting their own weaknesses, weaponized against them. On the stage, Toshinori watched in horror. His hands were clenched into fists, his knuckles white. He was useless. A spectator to the destruction of the world he had given his life to protect. He saw Ada and Irarika helping to evacuate civilians, their faces grim and determined, but they were hopelessly outmatched. His eyes scanned the chaos for the one person who could turn the tide. Midoriya, my boy, where are you? He whispered, his voice trembling. The main battle had coalesced around Endeavor and Shigaraki. It was a clash of titans. Endeavor's hell flame clashed against Shigaraki's relentless advance. But Shigaraki wasn't trying to win a fistfight. He just needed to get close. His hand, fingers splayed, reached for the number one hero. Endeavor was forced back, step by step, terrified of that deadly touch. The chaos provided the perfect cover. As the main heroes were occupied, Dabi and the remaining conscious Nomu broke off from the main fight. Their target was not another hero. Their target was the stage. Their target was him. Toshinori's blood ran cold as Dabi's turquoise eyes, so much like Endeavor's, landed on him. The villain's patchwork smile widened. Well, well, Dabi said, his voice a low, mocking purr. The retired symbol of peace. Just a bag of bones now, aren't you? Let's give the people a real show. Let's watch their old hope die. The Heian Nomu, a monstrous creature with multiple arms and sharpened claws, let out a guttural shriek and charged. Toshinori stood his ground, his mind racing. He had no power, no strength. He tried to bluff, to draw himself up to his full height, to project the phantom aura of all might. You will not succeed, villain! He boomed, his voice thin, lacking its old power. Dabi just laughed. Cute. The Nomu was almost on him. Toshinori closed his eyes, a profound sense of failure washing over him. This was it. This was his ignominious end. And then a sound. The sound of a thunderclap ripping the sky in two. Crack boom. A flash of green lightning descended from the heavens. Izuku Midoriya slammed into the plaza between Toshinori and the Nomu, his landing shattering the stone beneath his feet. He was in a low crouch, his head down, green energy crackling around him like a raging storm. A collective gasp went through the crowd still trapped in the plaza. The cameras, which had been broadcasting the horror to the world, all zoomed in on him. Hope, sudden and desperate, surged through the chaos. He's here! Deku is here! It's okay now! The Nomu, unthinking, swung its four-clawed hands in a deadly arc. Deku didn't even look up. He exploded upwards, a whirlwind of motion. Black whip tendrils shot out, not to restrain, but to redirect. He caught the Nomu's wrists, using its own momentum to spin it around and slam it into a nearby statue. Then, before it could recover, he appeared above it, his leg cocked back. St. Louis! Smash! He roared. The blow was not the wild, uncontrolled blast of his youth. It was a focused, concussive cannonball of force that struck the Nomu directly in its exposed brain. The creature's head imploded in a shower of gore, and its massive body crashed to the ground, twitching once before going still. Swift. Brutal. Efficient. Dabi took a step back, his eyes narrowed. So, the golden boy finally shows up to the party. Izuku slowly rose to his full height and turned. The hope that had filled Toshinori's chest died in an instant, replaced by a cold, dreadful premonition. Deku wasn't looking at Dabi. He was looking at him. His face was a mask of cold, terrifying calm. The freckles were still there, but the warmth was gone. His eyes, those bright green eyes that had once shone with such admiration and love, were now filled with a chilling mixture of pain and pity. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer a reassuring word. He just stood there, the savior, looking down at the man he had saved as if he were a relic from a forgotten age. Deku. Toshinori started, his voice barely a whisper. My boy, your era created this broken world, All Might, Izuku said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it cut through Toshinori's soul like a shard of ice. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the finality of a judge passing sentence. It's time for it to end. The world seemed to slow down. Toshinori stared, his mind unable to process what was happening. This was his boy. His successor. The vessel of his hopes and dreams. Before he could respond, before he could even comprehend the monstrous meaning behind those words, black tendrils erupted from Izuku's back. They weren't aimed at Dabi. They shot forward and wrapped around Toshinori's frail body, binding his arms to his sides, pinning him in place. The energy was not violent, but it was unyielding. It was the power of one for all, the sacred torch he had passed on, now used to imprison him. A strangled cry escaped Toshinori's lips. It was a sound of pure, soul-shattering agony. No. Midoriya, why? On the other side of the plaza, the fighting had stopped. Heroes and villains alike were frozen, staring at the unbelievable scene unfolding on the main stage. Bakugo, who had just blasted his way through a group of lesser villains, froze mid-stride. His crimson eyes were wide with disbelief, his mind refusing to accept what he was seeing. "DKU!" he roared, a primal scream of confusion and rage. He started to run, to charge, but Shigaraki stepped in his way, a wide, triumphant grin on his face. "Don't interrupt," Shigaraki rasped. "The main event is just starting." Uraraka, who was huddled with a group of civilians behind a toppled bus, brought her hands to her mouth, her knuckles white. Tears streamed down her face, her body trembling uncontrollably. The cryptic, painful words from the briefing room now slammed into her with their full, horrific meaning. Sacrifices have to be made. I hope one day you'll understand. This was the sacrifice. He was sacrificing All Might. He was sacrificing everything. Izuku ignored the cries. He ignored the stunned silence of the world. He gently turned the restrained Toshinori to face the crowd, to face the cameras, a prisoner on his own stage. Then, Izuku himself turned and faced the Jumbotrons, his cold, determined face broadcast to millions across Japan and the world. He was calm. He was deliberate. This was his moment. He took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice was clear, steady, and carried across the ruined plaza by the same amplification system the villains had used. "My name is Izuku Midoriya," he began, the words dropping into the silence like stones into a still pond. "Many of you know me as Deku. I was chosen by this man," he gestured to the broken, weeping form of Toshinori Yagi, "to be your next symbol of peace." He paused, letting the weight of that statement sink in. He was owning it all. The legacy, the power, and the betrayal. For my entire life, I believed in that symbol. I believed that a smiling hero could make everything okay. I believed in this society, in its promise of safety and justice. I was wrong. His voice grew harder, colder, infused with the conviction of a zealot. "Look around you. This plaza, this monument to a lie is burning. Your greatest heroes lie defeated. Why? Because this system is a sham. It is a house of cards built on public relations, popularity polls, and a reactive model that only cleans up messes instead of preventing them. It is a system that allowed thousands to die in a war it should have seen coming. It is a system that creates as many villains as it does heroes, a cycle of endless, pointless conflict." He took a step forward, his eyes burning with a righteous fury. "I was told to inspire hope. But hope is not enough. A smile is not a strategy. The peace you have been sold is a lie, and peace built on lies is no peace at all." He turned his head slightly, his gaze finding a specific camera. It felt as if he was looking into every home, every phone screen, speaking to every single person individually. "Today, that lie ends. Today, we stop cleaning up the messes and start building a world where the messes don't happen. A world of order, of security, of true safety. It will not be built by celebrities in costumes. It will be built by will, and by strength. It will be built from the ashes of this corrupt and broken era." His gaze swept across the crowd, the heroes, the world. "Today, we begin anew." For a moment, there was absolute, stunned silence. The entire world held its breath. Then Mr. Compress, with a theatrical flourish, clapped his hands. "Bravo! A stunning debut." He tossed a handful of marbles onto the ground, which erupted into smoke, covering the villain's retreat. Dabi gave Toshinori one last, mocking salute before disappearing into the smoke. Izuku stood for one final moment. He looked at Toshinori, at the man who was his idol, his mentor, his father figure. He saw the utter devastation in those sunken blue eyes, the complete shattering of a great man's spirit. A flicker of agonizing pain crossed Izuku's own face, a crack in his perfect, cold facade. This was the cost. He had known it, but feeling it was another thing entirely. He hardened his heart, turning the pain into fuel. He turned his back on All Might, on his past, on everything he had ever been. He walked into the swirling smoke, a dark silhouette against the backdrop of a burning plaza. The last thing the world saw of him was his straight, unyielding back as he took his place at the head of the League of Villains, their new leader, their new symbol. The smoke cleared, revealing the full extent of the devastation. The Hero Hope Plaza was a smoldering ruin. The top heroes were injured, defeated, and humiliated. The crowd was screaming, a stampede of pure, unadulterated panic. And in the center of it all, on the grand stage, the black tendrils of Black Whip dissolved into nothing, releasing their prisoner. Toshinori Yagi collapsed to his knees. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a symbol. He was just a man, a broken man, kneeling in the ruins of his legacy, his anguished sobs lost in the cacophony of a world that had just watched its greatest hope become its greatest nightmare. The point of no return had been crossed, and the path back was now nothing but smoke and ash. The world didn't so much descend into chaos as it shattered into a million pieces, each fragment reflecting a different face of horror. The immediate aftermath of the Plaza Proclamation, as the media was already calling it, was not a symphony of screaming, but a stunned, deafening silence. It was the silence of a world holding its breath, unable to process the sheer, paradigm-shifting enormity of what it had just witnessed. For a few long, agonizing minutes, it felt as if time itself had frozen. The dust settled over the ruined Hero Hope Plaza. The smoke from Dabi's fires curled into the impossibly blue sky. The face of Izuku Midoriya, cold and resolute, was burned onto the retinas of millions. Then, the world broke. This chapter is not a single narrative. It is a mosaic of those shattered pieces, a collage of moments from the hours and days that followed the betrayal, showing how the single act of one boy sent a cataclysmic shockwave through every level of society. Perspective, Class 1A. The eye of the storm. The common room of the Heights Alliance dormitory had become a tomb. The air was thick and heavy, each breath a struggle against a suffocating blanket of grief and disbelief. No one spoke. The television, which had been replaying Izuku's speech on a torturous loop, was now off, its black screen reflecting the pale, drawn faces of the students scattered around the room. Uraraka sat curled in the same armchair as before, but this time she wasn't holding a mug of tea. She was clutching a small, worn All Might keychain, the cheap one Izuku had owned for years, the one that had fallen out of his pocket during one of their earliest training exercises. She had kept it, meaning to give it back, but had never found the right moment. Now, she gripped it so tightly the plastic cut into her palm. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, but the tears had stopped. They had been replaced by a hollow, aching emptiness. The boy who had made her want to be a hero so she could help her parents had just declared war on the very concept of heroism. The world no longer made sense. Ida stood by the window, staring out at the UA grounds, his posture uncharacteristically slumped. The rigid discipline that defined him had fractured. His world was one of rules, of protocols, of clear lines between right and wrong. Izuku had not just crossed a line, he had vaporized it. He had used logic, twisted, corrupted logic, but logic nonetheless, to justify the unthinkable. How do you fight an enemy who believes, with every fiber of his being, that he is the hero of the story? It is a catastrophic failure of the systems we are sworn to uphold, he murmured to the glass, his own reflection staring back, equally lost. We failed him. The entire institution failed him. Todoroki was sitting on the floor, his back against the couch, his expression a mask of stoic ice. But underneath the calm exterior, his mind was a whirlwind. He, more than anyone, understood the allure of rejecting a flawed legacy. He had spent years hating the world his father represented, but he had chosen to forge his own path within that world, to become a different kind of hero. Izuku had chosen to burn it all down. He replayed Izuku's words to him at the warehouse. Your father's world is burning. You should be happy. The words, which had been a confusing jab then, were now a horrifying invitation. Izuku believed he was liberating them all. Todoroki closed his eyes, the left side of his face flushing with heat, the right growing cold. He was not liberated. He was horrified. Then a sound. A rhythmic, violent thump-thump crack from down the hall. It was a sound of pure, unrestrained rage. Kirishima, who had been trying and failing to comfort Mina, stood up. I should go check on him. Let him be, Ciro said quietly, his voice rough. What are you gonna say? What can any of us say? The sounds were coming from Bakugo's room. Everyone knew it. Inside, the room was a disaster zone. The desk was overturned, its legs splintered. The wardrobe was cracked, a fist-sized dent in its door. The walls were covered in scorch marks and small craters. In the center of the destruction stood Katsuki Bakugo, his chest heaving, his hands smoking, his knuckles bruised and bleeding. Sweat and tears streamed down his face, mingling in a mask of incandescent fury. He wasn't just angry. He was wounded. This was a betrayal on a level so personal, so fundamental, it had cracked the very foundations of his world. For his entire life, Deku had been the constant, the pebble in his shoe. The weak, sniveling follower who somehow, impossibly, kept getting back up. The rival who had forced him to look at his own weaknesses. The one person who truly believed in the dream of being the #1 hero as much as he did. And that person had just spat on that dream, crushed it under his heel, and declared it a lie in front of the entire world. DKU! He roared again, the name a raw, guttural sound of pain. He punched the wall again, not even flinching as plaster exploded around his fist. You damn nerd! You coward! It wasn't Deku's power that enraged him. It wasn't even the alliance with the villains. It was the look in his eyes. The cold, pitying look he'd given All Might. The look of someone who had given up. Bakugo had spent his entire life trying to be the strongest, to never show weakness, to win at all costs. But he had never, ever given up on the core ideal of a hero's victory. Deku had. He had looked at the fight and decided it was easier to burn the arena than to win the match. Idiot, you stupid idiot! He choked out, his rage finally collapsing under the weight of a devastating, unfamiliar sorrow. He sank to his knees amidst the wreckage of his room, his body trembling. The world saw a new villain. Bakugo saw the kid he'd known his whole life, lost in a forest of his own making, and he felt a terrifying, unfamiliar responsibility. He wasn't just Deku's rival anymore. He was the only one who truly understood the boy he used to be. And a new, terrifying thought began to form in the ashes of his rage. I have to be the one to drag him back. Perspective, All Might the fallen idol. The hospital room was pristine, white, and suffocating. The rhythmic beep of a heart monitor was the only sound, a steady counterpoint to the storm raging inside Toshinori Yagi's soul. He sat on the edge of the bed, not in a patient's gown, but in the same rumpled yellow suit he'd worn to the plaza. He hadn't changed. He hadn't slept. He had just been sitting there for hours, staring at a blank wall, a shell of a man haunted by the ghost of his own legacy. The physical examination had found nothing wrong. He was, for a man with one lung and no stomach, in stable condition. But the doctors couldn't see the real injury. They couldn't see the gaping, cauterized wound that had been torn through his spirit. He had failed. The thought was a constant, repeating mantra, a drumbeat of self-loathing. He had chosen a boy. A kind, heroic, quirkless boy with the heart of a true champion. He had given him the world's greatest power, a sacred torch passed down through generations. He had laid the burden of being the next symbol of peace onto his small, determined shoulders. And in doing so, he had created a monster. He thought back to every conversation, every training session, every piece of advice he had ever given Izuku. You have to smile, to show them you are never afraid. You have to be the pillar that supports everyone. You are the next All Might. He had been so focused on creating a successor, a carbon copy of his own smiling symbol, that he had never stopped to consider the crushing weight of that expectation. He had taught Izuku how to be a symbol, but had he ever taught him how to be a person? Had he ever shown him how to handle the despair, the failure, the moments when a smile wasn't enough? No. He had just pushed him harder. He had seen the boy's obsessive nature, his tendency to break himself for others, and instead of tempering it, he had praised it. He had called it heroic. He had cultivated the very traits that, when twisted by the horrors of the war, had metastasized into this cold, terrifying ideology. The door to his room slid open. Detective Tsukachi Naomasa entered, his face grim, his trench coat looking even more rumpled than usual. He was holding a tablet. Toshinori, he said softly. I'm sorry to intrude, but we need to talk. Toshinori didn't look at him. There's nothing to talk about. You saw it. The world saw it. We need to understand why, Tsukachi insisted, pulling up a chair. My quirk, it can't be used on a video recording. We need your insight. You knew him better than anyone. Was he being controlled, brainwashed by All for One? Toshinori finally turned his head, and Tsukachi was taken aback by the sheer, hollow emptiness in his eyes. No, Toshinori whispered, his voice hoarse. It's worse than that. Brainwashing can be broken. A quirk can be countered. But this is a conviction. Did you listen to his words, Naomasa? He believes what he is doing is right. He believes he is saving the world. He gestured weakly at the blank wall. All for One didn't need to brainwash him. He just had to water a seed that I planted myself. The seed that told him he alone had to bear the weight of the world. The seed that told him any sacrifice was worth it to save everyone. All for One just pointed him at a different definition of saving. He looked down at his own frail, trembling hands. The hands that had once saved millions now felt like the hands of a villain. My predecessor, Nana Shimura, she told me that one for all is not just a power, but a great weight. She warned me. And I took that weight and I placed it on the shoulders of a child. And it crushed him. His voice broke, and for the first time since the broadcast, a single tear traced a path down his skeletal cheek. This isn't his failure, Naomasa. It's mine. I created this. I created him. Tsukachi had no answer. He could offer no words of comfort, because in his heart, he knew Toshinori was right. This tragedy wasn't born in the plaza. It was born the day a desperate, quirkless boy met his idol on a rooftop. Perspective. The public, the shattered mirror. The reaction of the public was not a monolith. It was a fractured, chaotic spectrum of fear, anger, and a terrifying, growing understanding. Fear. The immediate, overwhelming reaction was raw panic. In the hours following the Plaza Proclamation, cities became ghost towns. People locked their doors, pulled their children from school, and stayed glued to their screens. The stock market plummeted. Gun sales, in countries where they were legal, skyrocketed. The trust that had been the bedrock of hero society, the belief that if you were in trouble, someone good and strong would come, was shattered. Now, the strongest one of all was the enemy. And he knew everything. He knew how society worked, how heroes operated, how to dismantle it all from the inside out. The fear was not of a monster in the dark. It was of the boy next door, the smiling hero in training, revealing himself to be the wolf. Anger. As the initial shock wore off, it curdled into a thick, poisonous anger. Protests erupted, not just outside Yuehai, but in front of hero agencies across the country. The slogans were bitter and accusatory. You created him. Heroes are the real villains. No more lies. People felt betrayed, not just by Deku, but by the entire system that had produced him. Every smiling hero on a billboard now looked like a liar. Every piece of merchandise felt like a hollow token of a fraudulent faith. The anger was aimed at Endeavor for his failures, at Hawks for his compromised intelligence, at UA for its inability to protect its students, and most of all, at the spectral, absent figure of All Might, the man who had anointed the Antichrist. Understanding, this was the most insidious and dangerous reaction. In the dark corners of the internet, on anonymous forums and encrypted chat channels, a different narrative began to take hold. Izuka's speech was dissected, analyzed, and debated. And for a growing minority, it started to make a terrible kind of sense. He's not wrong though, is he? One anonymous user posted. My neighborhood was leveled during the war. The heroes showed up 2 hours later for a photo op. Where were they when we needed them? Think about the hero killer stain. Another wrote. Everyone called him a monster, but he was saying the same thing. The system is corrupt. It's about fame and money, not saving people. Deku is just staying with the power to actually do something about it. Memes began to circulate. Some depicted Deku as a fallen angel, a tragic figure forced into darkness. Others portrayed him as a revolutionary, a Che Guevara for the quirk age. His words, peace built on lies is no peace at all, became a rallying cry for the disillusioned, the disenfranchised, the people who had been left behind by the bright, shiny world of heroes. They didn't see a villain. They saw a truth-teller. They saw a liberator. And for the first time, the League of Villains had something more powerful than Nomu or quirks, an ideology that was starting to resonate with the very people the heroes were sworn to protect. Perspective, the strategy meeting the unwinnable war. The mood in UA's main conference room was funereal. Principal Niza sat at the head of the long table, his white fur looking dull under the harsh fluorescent lights. His usual cheerful, calculating demeanor was gone, replaced by a heavy weariness. His beady black eyes stared at the large screen on the wall, which displayed a single, frozen image, Izuku Midoriya's face at the moment of his proclamation. Around the table sat the grim-faced remnants of Hero Society's leadership. Aizawa, his face a landscape of exhaustion, his capture weapon draped loosely around his neck. Endeavor, his flames completely suppressed, looking older and more worn than ever before. A recovering Hawks, his back bandaged, his few remaining feathers ruffled and useless. Several other top heroes, including a somber Ryukyu and a stone-faced Mirko, completed the circle. The public trust is at an all-time low, Niza began, his voice barely above a whisper. Lower than after Kamino. Lower than after the war. The HPSC is in chaos. The government is considering declaring a state of national emergency. Forget the public trust, Mirko snarled, slamming a fist on the table. What about our assets? Midoriya knows everything. Our standard procedures, our communication protocols, our contingency plans. He knows the weaknesses of every hero he ever analyzed in those damn notebooks of his. He's not just a powerful opponent, he's a walking, talking intelligence breach of catastrophic proportions. Aizawa rubbed his tired eyes. He was my student. I should have seen it. The change in him, the coldness. I wrote it off as trauma from the war. I thought he was just hardening himself. I didn't realize he was sharpening himself into a weapon against us. This is not the time for self-recrimination. Endeavor interjected, his voice a low growl. Hawks. You suspected him. What's his endgame? Hawks leaned forward, his golden eyes sharp and focused despite his injuries. It's not chaos. Shigaraki wants chaos. This is different. This is deconstruction. He believes the system is rotten to the core, so he's targeting the foundations. First, he undermined our operational capacity at the port. Then, he shattered our public image and took out our leadership at the plaza. He's not trying to kill us. He's trying to make us obsolete. He's showing the world that we can't protect them, and then he's offering them his own brand of protection. Niza steepled his paws. And he has the single most powerful quirk in existence, enhanced by the 7 quirks before it, all wielded by a genius-level tactical mind. It is, to be blunt, an impossible threat. The room fell silent, the weight of Niza's words crushing them. How do you fight an enemy who is faster, stronger, and smarter than all of you combined? An enemy who knows your every move before you make it. So what's the plan? Ryukyu asked, breaking the silence. We have to treat him as the world's #1 threat. We have to hunt him down. How? Aizawa shot back, his voice laced with bitter frustration. He has float, smokescreen, and danger sense. He can't be tracked. He can't be ambushed. He can probably feel us coming from miles away, and even if we could corner him, who here can actually stand up to one for all at what must be close to its peak? The silence that answered was damning. Even Endeavor, the #1 hero, knew that in a straight fight, he would lose. He had seen the terrifying efficiency with which Izuku had dispatched the high-end Noma. It was Niza who finally offered a sliver of a plan, his sharp mind looking for an angle, any angle. We cannot treat him as a conventional villain, the principal said, his eyes glinting with a familiar spark of cunning. We cannot outpower him. Therefore, we must outthink him. He has one weakness. It is the very thing that drove him to this path, his core desire to save people. He is not Shigaraki. He is not driven by a desire for destruction. He is a fallen hero, not a true villain. His ideology has a fatal flaw. To build his new world of order, he will eventually have to dirty his hands in a way that his soul cannot tolerate. Our task is not to defeat him in battle. Our task is to force him into a position where he has to choose between his monstrous ideology and his heroic instincts. We must find a way to make Izuku Midoriya fight himself. The heroes around the table looked at each other. It was a desperate, psychological gambit, a plan built on a knife's edge. But it was the only plan they had. They were no longer fighting a war of strength, but a war for the soul of one young man, and the fate of the world depended on the outcome. The world was in ashes, and their only hope was to find the one spark of the old hero still burning within the heart of their greatest enemy.